All right. Hello, everyone. I hope you're staying on top of it. I recently saw a video that I thought was a great example of the sort of thinking and the sort of systems that society in general is going to be subjected to in the future. A lot of these systems have already been rolled out, and there's already a lot of people talking about these systems and the potential downside, the negatives that could be introduced because of these systems. I'm talking about social point scoring systems and star ratings, which are used in websites, things like Amazon ratings, which are all good product ratings. That all helps people. Then they have Uber ratings, where customers and drivers rate each other on performance and things like that, which is pretty good. But then there are social point scoring systems where people start getting affected negatively based on how they interact with society, and that this has the potential to be a form of control that is all-encompassing and more pervasive than anything that we've ever experienced before. And this is currently being rolled out in China, and it is planned to be rolled out in the West. I personally think this is extremely concerning, and it doesn't sound like the sort of system that I would like to be involved in. It sounds like the sort of thing that would completely ruin my life, and probably a lot of other people's as well. This sort of system, this automatic systems of payments and deductions and penalties and things have been rolled out in Australia for a long time on the roads. It's now been introduced into the ticket system. It will be introduced on an even greater level in the future, I am sure. So I'll be playing two clips. One is David Whitehead from the Unslaved podcast, who is explaining a story he was told about this stuff by a communist professor who's very upset about the whole thing, and he thinks it's going to be very negative. So I'll play that clip. Then I'll play a clip of a guy I discovered recently called Ray Dalio, who is a billionaire hedge fund investor. He is explaining one of these systems that he uses within his business that he calls an idea meritocracy. And that sounds great, doesn't it? But yeah, when we go through what the idea meritocracy actually is, I will suggest that it is the collectivization of thought and opinion, and weighing the individual's opinion against that of every other individual or the group, and effectively stamping out all individual opinion. It sells itself as the sort of round table model of coming to conclusions and making decisions, but I think it is false in that. And I will show the clip and then I will explain this in greater detail. I think it's presenting itself as a sort of round table meeting, but this is absolutely false. I think it has been put forward by many wise men of the past that it is the individual opinion that really breaks new ground, and people who think outside of the box, who go counter to popular opinion, these are the people who make the biggest differences in the world. And it seems to me that this is the sort of system and the sort of thinking that would stamp these people out and make their opinions seem invaluable or even invalid. So I'll show those clips now.
I just recently did an interview with a retired NYU professor who had his own wake up about what's going on in the education system. He actually came from a pure communist point of view. He had been raised in that, he had been indoctrinated with that, and he shared his story about how he came out of that and how it was the people he was interacting with that woke him up to this. And he was breaking down. He's like, they're going to be bringing in scoring systems, public scoring systems. This is all being developed by Google in China. He's actually writing a new book called Google Archipelago, like the Gulag Archipelago. He's basically talking about how they're trying to create the ultimate collectivized control grid, having in the same way that people like your posts on Facebook, or they can now show emoticons, whether they like it or not, or if they're laughing at it or if they're angry at it. This is going to be a way that they're going to have people voting you, how you interacted at a cash register, how you got onto the bus and talked to the bus driver, what kind of book you checked out of the library. And they predicted it in an episode of Black Mirror on Netflix. It's crazy. And so you see this happening and you go, they're actually building that in. And I don't want people to get pessimistic about it. Just realize they're just going to keep rolling this out until there's some kind of resistance, and don't wait for the masses to resist this. They're going to line up around the block for this shit. Think this is the best shit ever. Everybody likes me now. And it's all inauthentic.
So yeah, that sounds pretty fucking shit. That doesn't sound like something I want to be a part of. That sounds like something I want to avoid at all costs. So now let's listen to what billionaire hedge fund investor Ray Dalio has to say about his systems.
So the real question is, do you want to know your weaknesses? Do you want to know each other's weaknesses? Because if you know each other's weaknesses, and you're all going to be better off if you're dealing with that in a forthright way, knowing your strengths and weaknesses, because that's what makes up a great team. So when you know what someone is like, you know what you can expect for them. That's a power. So an idea meritocracy is that kind of organization. I want to give you just a quick clip of how that works, how we try to bring up information. There are many different tools, but what I found is that in order to be effective, I needed to have tools, apps, and things that were operating by that would facilitate that. So I'm going to take you into a meeting and give you a flavor for one of the tools and one of our methodologies for operating that way.
A week after the U.S. election, our research team held a meeting to discuss what a Trump presidency would mean for the U.S. economy. Naturally, people had different opinions on the matter and how we were approaching the discussion. The dot collector collects these views. It has a list of a few dozen attributes, and so whenever someone thinks something about another person's thinking, it's easy for them to convey that assessment. They simply note the attribute and provide a rating from 1 to 10. For example, as the meeting began, a researcher named Jen rated me a 3, in other words, badly, for not showing a good balance of assertiveness and open-mindedness. As the meeting transpired, Jen's assessment of people added up like this. Others in the room had very different opinions. That's normal. Different people are always going to have different opinions. And who knows who's right? Let's just look at what people thought about how I was doing. Some people thought I did well, others poorly. With each of these views, we can explore the thinking behind the numbers. Here's what Jen and Larry said. Note that everyone gets to express their thinking, including their critical thinking, regardless of their position in the company. Jen, who's 24 years old and fresh out of college, can tell me, the CEO of the company, that I'm approaching things terribly. This tool helps people both express their opinions and separate themselves from their opinions to see things from a higher level. When Jen and others shift their attentions from inputting their opinions to looking down on the whole screen, their perspective changes. They see their own opinions as just one of many, and naturally start to ask themselves, how do I know my opinion is right? That shift in perspective of going above it and seeing the full range of views shifts the conversation from arguing over individual opinions to figuring out objective criteria for determining which opinions are best. Behind the dot collector is a computer that is watching what all these people are thinking, correlates it with how they think, and communicates back to each of them based on that. Then it draws the data from the meetings to create a pointillist painting of what people are like and how they think. And it does all that guided by algorithms. Knowing what people are like helps to match them up better with their jobs. For example, a creative thinker who is unreliable might be matched up with someone who is reliable but not creative. Knowing what people are like also allows us to decide what responsibilities to give them and to weigh our decisions based on people's merits. We call it their believability. Here's an example of a vote that we took where the majority of people felt one way, but when we weighed people's views on the basis of their merits, the answer was completely different. This process allows us to make decisions not based on democracy and not based on autocracy, but based on algorithms that take people's believability into consideration.
Yeah, so we really operate that. I just want to give you just highlight some things. First of all, anybody can criticize or anybody on the basis of a non-hierarchical approach. So we're bringing out all the complaints. We capture that information. So that way, we're building a meritocracy, an idea of meritocracy that people believe is a fair system, so that there's weighting on that, on the basis of, capabilities. And so we do this believability weighted based on data. And so nobody is going to be able to be hierarchical in that sense. You can make the decisions based on the quality of the thinking, and that can evolve over a period of time. People learn their strengths and weaknesses. And then we have behind that data, lots of data, because every day everybody's getting a 360-degree review from that. But also, we're seeing how they themselves make decisions, and we process that data in a way that everybody thinks is fair. So it's not for everybody. I would say probably a third of the people just can't get through it. A lot of people struggle. And then on the other hand, we call it getting to the other side. When they get to the other side, when they're used to it, they can't work any place else, because they can't go back into a typical organization in which all of that stuff is hidden, and there's politics, and there's lack of sincerity, and there's the associated problems with all of that. And then beyond that, there's a great power for being able to turn those, any of your thinking, into algorithms. Do you want to have algorithmic decision making? A lot of what we're doing is this data, and through the data and algorithms, we actually have the machine, the decision making machine, run in parallel, like playing a chess game through a computer and doing it in partnership with the computer. So I'd like you to think about those things. Then you could think about how to get them. That's what I was trying to convey. We've built a bunch of tools and apps and things, and we're going to make those publicly available so that people who want to do that, like the dot collector and those tools, will have the opportunity to be able to operate that way. We're going to make them available. So that's it in and maybe a little bit too long a winded way, but thank you, and we'll take some questions about it.
Okay, so he talks about the idea meritocracy. And I've got to say, given the context in which I've heard that word meritocracy used over the last 5 years, the idea of an idea meritocracy, that scares the shit out of me. So an idea meritocracy is essentially your individual opinion being weighed against that of everyone else. This reminds me of Michael Tsarion's thing where he talks about the ad that says, "I am who I am because of everybody." And that looks like a great system. It's the definition of collectivization, and this seems like a great system to bring that about. So your merit scores completely change democratic results. And he says there's no democracy and there's no autocracy. It is meritocracy. I would say the autocracy is still there, but it is hidden behind algorithms. And of course, most people will fail to recognize that. People seem to think algorithms are something like a god. They don't realize that some guy wrote them. Anyway, do you want to know your weaknesses, he says. Dangerous question. And what are weaknesses? He doesn't really get into that. He doesn't get into what the data is or how they weigh strengths and weaknesses of people, but I would say that could really be used in a very autocratic way. So the new college kid, Jen, comes in with fresh opinions, and she looks at the scores of everyone else, and they're like, come on, Jen, your opinion's not worth shit. Maybe it's time for you to change the way you think. And you feel like Jen is probably, going to get beaten down over time, and she's going to become just one of the collective with collectivized opinions. So yeah, I mean, a lot of people find this when they join a company or whatever. They're sort of encouraged to become part of the company's culture, and it's a collectivized mindset situation, the whole thing. I would call this a controlled situation that's claiming to be objective. It's a biased system that's claiming to be objective. So everyone in this system is subject to algorithms, and they're told that this is a good system and it's objective because of that. Well, we have all experienced how painful being subject to algorithms can be. It is extremely painful and unfair and time-consuming, annoying, frustrating, painful. It's the world before algorithms was definitely better than the world after algorithms. But algorithms definitely help the 1%. It makes their life infinitely more easy, and that's why we have them. That's the truth. So people believe, yeah, he says at the end, he says, people believe this is a fair system. You'll notice he doesn't just say, it is a fair system, right? He says, people believe it's a fair system. And he says this twice. Language is important. He says, we process the data in a way that everybody believes is fair. Right. They just believe it. How about you show them the data? He says, the system works on radical truthfulness and radical transparency. I'd say, okay, let me see my point rating. Let's see how you work it out, and then show me the algorithm. We'll see how transparent the system is when those questions are asked. And then he says, when they are used to it, they can't work anywhere else, and they can't work under the old systems. Another way of saying that would be they're fully indoctrinated. And then at the end he shows this huge list of tools and apps that he's selling based on this mindset, this idea of meritocracy. And I got to say, when I saw that list of apps, I got a little bit scared. I thought, shit, this is how all businesses are going to be run in the future. Everyone is going to be subjected to this shit. You're going to have to fill out endless fucking surveys, which you don't get paid for. A lot of jobs already contain this stuff. It's just, and it's going to, your opinion's not really that valid. Everyone else sort of thinks different. So, fuck you. Fuck your opinion, and the collective wins. So, yep, this is how business is going to work in the future. God help us all. I would do anything that you can to avoid such systems. But as Michael Tsarion and people like him have said, people are going to be lining up around the block for this shit. People cannot wait for this stuff to get rolled out. Alright, until next time.
The emotions as we know them today is merely an approval rating of whether or not other people are approving of your mask. And then you emote accordingly. What the fuck is that? And then the next step to that is a cyborg, So the philosophy of the false psychology, the black psychology, is what's motivating these people to create cyborgs and androids and virtual brains and global brains, because they're not in the real conscience. They're not talking as real selves. So there's not real emotion exuding. People have forgotten what these things really are. There's no feeling of passion towards anything. There's special areas where you should be passionate, which is about your race, about your history, about your traditions. That's completely gone as well. They've ironed it out so that even the passion that you think is over some fucking stupid shit. It's not that you don't go along with that for dramatic purposes and suspension of disbelief. I'm not against it. But when that entire entertainment dumb show has replaced authentic feeling about the history of your race and your own forefathers and their struggle, and then your emotions aren't yours. Your emotions are, like I said, taking a coordinate. Am I approved of? Am I liked? Is my mask satisfying people? Are they accepting it? The self is sitting then in a sarcophagus, totally alone and encased. Right. What's that got to do with the real self? Absolutely nothing.